Chancellor Rachel Reeves defended her decision to introduce £40 billion in tax increases as part of the latest UK budget, asserting that the measures are crucial for meeting the country's funding needs and addressing a significant fiscal deficit. Reeves emphasised that increasing public service spending requires careful financial backing, framing her budget as a commitment to fiscal responsibility and long-term economic stability. We need to ensure that the cost of these critical investments are covered, Reeves has said, pointing to the budget's aim to support working families through popular initiatives such as raising the minimum wage and allowing universal credit recipients to retain more of their earnings. She expressed pride in her ability to include these provisions, underscoring their role in supporting low-income households. The Chancellor also called attention to a £22 billion fiscal shortfall, which she attributed to mismanagement by the previous Conservative government. Reeves argued that while the current budget prioritises families and economic support, restoring the nation's financial health requires addressing this substantial deficit. Major announcements in the UK budget include several impactful changes in investments. Starting with capital gains tax, rates have now been raised to 18% for the lower band and 24% for the higher band, with no change to rates for residential property. Next, we see a significant shift in employer national insurance. Beginning April 2025, employers will pay 15% more on salaries over £5,000. The inheritance tax threshold remains frozen until 2030, with pensions and AIM shares now included as part of estate calculations. Moving to property, there's an increase in the stamp duty surcharge on second homes, which rises from 3 to 5%. On the investment front, the government has earmarked substantial funding for public services, with £5 billion allocated to housing and additional significant investments in transport, healthcare and defence. Finally, targeted support has been directed to key industries, with £1 billion allocated for aerospace and £2 billion for the automotive sector, aimed at driving growth and innovation in these areas. Well, for more on this, I was earlier joined in the studio by our business correspondent, Simon Pusey. Simon, so the budget has dominated headlines, not just this week, but of course before that, because it had all been briefed to the media. The Speaker of the House, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, not happy with Rachel Reeves at all. Really difficult to see if there are any winners, surprisingly, although, of course, we know the national minimum wage will be hiked. But apart from that, I haven't seen anybody giving any flowers to Rachel Reeves. Can you talk to me about some of the big announcements and who are the actual winners and losers from this significant fiscal announcement?
Yeah, it's also significant, isn't it, because it's the first time a woman has been Chancellor and has announced a budget in this way. It has been massively overhyped.
Yeah.
I think because they knew that it was going to be so controversial with the tax increases after they said there weren't going to be any tax increases when they were elected. So that we'll come on to that. In terms of winners and losers, I think it's one of these where you have to wait and see, which sounds like a kind of get out of jail thing for us as journalists to say, oh, we don't actually know. But
we don't.
She's looking for growth, right? She's talking about growth. And so we have to wait and see whether that works. But it is a big gamble because £40 billion in spending and in tax hikes, when she hasn't put that in her manifesto, and you've had Rishi Sunak got up immediately after and said, you've lied to the British public, you've deceived them, you said at the election that you weren't going to increase taxes and you have massively. Let's just start. The International Monetary Fund has welcomed the measures announced by Rachel Reeves. That is quite a rare moment for what is an influential and supposedly impartial financial watchdog. So that's a big boost for her.
Yeah, that's a plus.
And they say they're backing the increase in investment and spending on urgent public services, as well as sustainable tax rises, is what they say. I think the main criticism has been around the national insurance hike, which she admits will hit people in their pay packets.
Businesses.
And especially when you're talking about growth, it's quite hard to square that circle, because employers are going to bear the brunt of this, and then it's going to be passed on to employees. And that doesn't sound like it's going to encourage growth.
No.
You're going to hit them there, because she wants small and medium-sized businesses to flourish within the UK, and that is going to do the opposite, really. The Prime Minister criticising broken promises, saying little of what Rachel Reeves announced was in the manifesto. She says, well, you left a 20 billion black hole, which
Jeremy Hunt denies.
They deny. So It's a hard one to sort of look at. I think you do need to look at it years down the line. Is this going to encourage growth? There is also the whole issue of Brexit in the background, which isn't really mentioned because people are scared to mention it because so many people voted for Brexit. But it's quite hard to deny that that is something that's probably flatlined things, and we don't have our biggest trading partner like we did. So people always talking about 1993. That's the last time we had tax hikes of this nature.
Yes.
But we had a much better economy then because we had a huge trading partner on our doorstep, which we no longer have, and we're trying to sort of play catch up with that.
Geopolitics also not as fragmented.
No, exactly, yes. So I think it's hard to find the winners and losers in this. Well, you can obviously find the losers because a lot of people have got will have higher taxes.
Private school VAT.
Yeah,
I know a lot of our viewers in Nigeria won't be happy about that, especially if they've got children, 3 or 4 children in private schools across England.
And this is why she leaked what she did, and that we knew about that for a long time, didn't we? Because there would be the markets would go absolutely crazy if she unloaded all of this at once. I think the VAT on private schools is one that's, if you don't have children in private schools and you hear that they're not paying tax, the wealthiest are not paying tax, then it's quite a hard one. And also when you're doing things of the nature that she is, then to leave that out would be quite tough. But
what about the NHS? Got to talk about that because it seems to be a win for the NHS, although I don't think we haven't heard officially from them.
Well, it's a lot of extra money, isn't it?
Yes.
I think a lot of people would say this is kind of like a black hole that you throw money into, and it never seems to get better. So it almost needs a root and branch reformation in some ways, the NHS, or needs to modernise massively. You can't just keep increasing the amount of money you're putting into it. But it is obviously a very important thing for Labour, who created the NHS, and it's such an important institution
for all of us.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's important that obviously it gets the funding it deserves. But that is, you're right, one of the things that has got a lot of money. I think things like teachers and schools haven't got as much money as they were hoping for.
Although they got the pay increase.
They've got a pay increase, but they're, generally across the board, the public sector, the NHS may have got a lot of money, but the public sector is much bigger than just the NHS. You've got social care that you need to worry about as well. So there's so much going on. And I don't think, given the state of the economy that we knew was in, I don't think there was ever going to be, Rachel Reeves was ever going to come out as like a victor with this. I think it does just depend on the next few months and years as to how the markets and how growth goes and how the economy fares under what has been a very overhyped or a very hyped up budget, and it'll be interesting to see how it goes down in the long term.
What's the mood music on the ground? How people, normal people like us, coping with it? Do people care? Do you think people really paid attention, or are they all focused on the election across the pond? I think
more than ever this budget has been focused on by people because we've heard so much about it. We've heard lots of leaks and briefings about it.
Yes.
And I think people were quite worried ahead of this because so many times we've heard it's not going to be easy. The Tories have left us in this terrible state. So I think people were actually quite anxious about this. And I think it could have been worse on many fronts. There were a lot of things that didn't happen that we thought might. Usually budgets are boring. Budgets are for people who read the Financial Times and people who are experts and people who have money involved in it. I think for the ordinary people, usually they don't care, and that's been what's been distinctive here. Not only Rachel Reeves, the first female Chancellor, to produce a budget like this, but also the fact that people are talking about it, and it has been hyped up for months now. But you're right, the US election probably pulling a little bit, and when we're talking about the economy and markets and financial, the US election is probably going to be quite high up in terms of with wars as well. So it's quite a hard job, isn't it, for Rachel Reeves to talk about various things, and then it could be all blown out of the water if Donald Trump gets in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah, exactly. I suppose we'll be talking about that this time next week. Thank you so much, Simon.
Thank you.
The budget talk continues with experts and policymakers weighing in on how these measures will shape the UK's economic future. I was earlier joined in the studio by the former British Minister of State for Europe, Dennis McShane. Dennis, it was a big fiscal event. Of course, the British media have been harping on about this for weeks and weeks and months, and I think we've still got weeks to assess it. But before we go into the detail, could you just give me your broad assessment on Rachel Reeves' statement, whether or not the British public can trust the Labour Party, given that what was in it, they promised wouldn't be in it, which is £40 billion in tax rises?
No, let's be very, very clear. I've read the manifesto carefully. The only promises were that on tax, that there'd be no new income tax rise. That hasn't happened. No increase in social security, what we call national insurance contributions on employees, on workers. That hasn't happened. And there'll be no increase in VAT. Those promises have been kept.
Okay, different words.
So not at all. I mean, you don't. If you listen to Sir Keir, and you've had him on the programme, and other Labour people for the last year, 2 years, all they've said is Britain is broken. We have to repair it. The policies that were been applied by the last government led to the biggest increase in mortgages, biggest increase in unemployment, and a big drop in growth. We are the repair team. Do you know something? When a repair team arrives on the scene, they've got to have the tools and the kit that's been paid for to do the job. And this budget, I think, look, in a year's time, 2 years' time, I think kind of asking, all the commentators on television the last few days on the budget. Do you want me to give you a good commentary who's going to win the Premier League next year?
Yeah.
No, you just tell me to get off out of here.
Yeah.
And yet these guys that women are listened to as if they were gurus, they don't know nothing. They're nice people, they're lovely people, they're friends of mine, they're much cleverer on economics than I am. But honestly, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. We know the International Monetary Fund, which normally loves rapping people across the knuckles, has welcomed this budget and said it's a good one.
They've been asking for investment in public
sector
for years, haven't they?
So, I mean, we can go there. Others, on the left will say it's not socialist enough. And on the business right will say, how dare you make business pay a bit more money? We want to go back to Liz Truss. I heard a chap on the BBC this morning who's Sir Nigel somebody or other. I checked him up. He was the biggest supporter of Brexit in the city, and Brexit has cost the British economy a lot of money. And he was a great, enthusiastic supporter of Liz Truss. Now, I'm sure...
Well, there were a few people that were supportive of Liz Truss's budget.
I'm sure in his city career, he made lots of money for his firm and treated employees well. I'm not dissing him in any way, but a man who backed Brexit and defended and promoted Liz Truss, I wouldn't put him on Radio 4. Maybe
I totally agree with you, Dennis, although, I think the public would say, can we even trust the politicians? Can we even trust the Prime Minister?
We will wait and see.
We shall wait and see. Thank you so much, Dennis McShane, the former British Minister of State for Europe for the Labour Party. Thank you so much for your time and expertise, as always, Dennis.
Thank you.
Thank you.